Welcome to Trail Time Stories. We hope you enjoy the scenery as we read stories that step out of the normal day-to-day mundane routine and help put ourselves in the character of those that have been briefly pulled from their sanctuary of safety and all too often times, their sanity. If you like the content, please like and subscribe as there will be much more content in the near future. 4 Minnesota Ghost Stories, Number 1. The following true ghost stories were published on yourghoststories.com. Story number 1. Demon by IMB6262, posted on 2/15/2020. 20 years ago, I bought a house in St. Paul near Mounds Park. I went to bless my house with sage and my whole body started to jitter to the point I had to stop. Everything was fine in the upper levels, then the blessing in the basement was just nothing I have ever experienced. I have kept going, but my friend yelled stop, and I was going pale. This was just the start. We renovated the basement, and as I was laying tile in the corner of the basement, the most disgusting stench came out of nowhere. My cat at the time crouched on his belly, smelled it, and backward crawled to the stairs very slowly like he was afraid. Some months later, my husband at the time began drinking heavily and began a very bad drug addiction. One evening we had watched TV and he made a loud sound like he was in pain. He reached to his calf like it was burning and had 3 red deep scratches. My daughter heard terrible noises and she lived in our basement, and we had a lice infestation and had to shave my grandson's head. We never got it. The 3 of us on the upper level were, or so I thought, were free and clear. Shortly after, we had black mold and flooring in the basement. My husband was turning into a pile of crap, treating me and my son badly. He even went after my daughter's boyfriend with a baseball bat. I protected myself with the Holy Spirit, salted around the house, and did the best I could. We divorced. There was a no-knock raid on our house, which was a total pitfall for the police and the total destruction of my marriage. I had a basic nervous breakdown just before this for no apparent reason. Anyway, he went to prison. I stayed in the house until I could get enough for an apartment. One evening my mother stayed with me and a damn bat flew out of the cat door we had installed on the basement door right up her freaking nightgown. This was my last laugh at that house. Come to find out, the plat of land or property showed all that purchased this crap pile had died, divorced, and went bankrupt. I went bankrupt and divorced also. I used to be optimistic and happy. I divorced my husband when he was in prison. I did find someone new, but I feel like something has attached to me. I am a depressive, have fibromyalgia, my back goes almost monthly, I hear projected voices, most recent a boy calling for mom, previously my name in my dead brother's voice, and am an alcoholic now. I never have expected that. I have seen things since all of this though. Neighbors swing, just one swing, then there is no wind, but was compelled to watch even though I would have poo-pooed it away. I have a sense or extra sense, but am concerned that not all of these bad experiences are anything to do with my natural sensitivity. Of course there is much more to this story, but I'd be here for days. If anyone can give any advice, I will definitely appreciate it. Story number 2, Clock Radio Ghost by Merely Existing. Date 2020-1/17. Over the years I have had many random ghosting occurrences, but what happened with my alarm clock has to be one of the strangest. I have a digital alarm clock radio, and a few years back I removed the backup battery because it had gone dead. Since then the clock has worked fine while plugged in. That was up until a couple of weeks ago, when all of a sudden at 3:21 p.m. the clock alarm went off for one beep, then it stopped. Then it went off for about a half a minute until I got up to go shut it off. It stopped when I go about a foot away from it. Then it went to the alarm set screen for about 20 seconds, then back to clock. Normally the alarm going off wouldn't be strange, except that this clock has 2 alarms and neither were set. Even if they were set, the last times they were set for was 5 p.m. and 11 a.m., so there was no reason for it to go off at 3:21. The other weirdness about it is the clock going to the alarm set screen. You first have to press and hold the alarm set button for about 10 seconds to get it to that screen. And when the alarm is set and goes off, it goes off for 1 hour before shutting off, not for only about 30 seconds. So I went upstairs to tell my dad about it because we have had some ghostly experiences before in our house, and in truth, I was a bit freaked out, so I stayed up there for about 5 minutes. When I finally got the courage to go downstairs again, I checked the clock and it was on the normal time screen. But as soon as I started watching the clock, it went to the alarm set screen again and then back to normal time. So I watched the clock for about 10 minutes and nothing was happening. Finally I said, "If you're still here, make it go back to the alarm set screen." And within 30 seconds, it went back to the alarm set screen. I have asked a few times since then, but since then it hasn't done anything unusual. At first I thought, well, maybe my clock is starting to go out, but seeing as this has not ever happened before this and hasn't happened since then, it seems like it could be a spirit, and the time chosen of 3/21 is my mom's birth date, and she recently died in August. So I am hoping it is my mom's spirit coming and visiting me. My mom believed in spirits, and we were talking about it one day long before she passed away. I told her, if you ever can contact me from the other side, use the electronics, because knocking things over in a house this chaotic would go unnoticed. Looks like she might have remembered. My mom also knew that I believed in this prior to her death, and though she never had experiences, I think she knows that I can feel her. Please never think you are merely existing. It's such a choice in life. You can exist or you can choose to move happily through your precious time, making the most of it. Sometimes it's finding that path, and sometimes others try and get in the way because of their own shortcomings. Don't ever let that happen. Find your joy. As a mom, that's what I tell my kids all the time, and I'm pretty certain you can honor your mom by living your very best and most joyful life. She wants that for you. All the best, dear. Mrs. R. Story number 3. Dream About Death Attracted a Spirit by M.N. Girl 97, date 2019-04-26. This experience happened to me last night, 4/26/2019, at around 3 a.m., and is the most frightening experience I've had by far. It started as a seemingly normal dream. In the dream, it was a dark and rainy afternoon, and I was wandering around a very small city exploring the buildings. Eventually, I was walking down a sidewalk and stopped in my tracks as I came upon a scene involving Mulder and Scully, two characters from the sci-fi show X-Files. If you haven't seen it, you can look up the two names in the show to get a picture of what these two actors look like. Funny enough, I haven't seen the show in years, so it is interesting that they were involved in my dream. Anyways, Mulder was lying on his side in a fetal position as though he had been injured by something, and Scully had her head on top of his body and was listening for his heartbeat. Suddenly, I was in Mulder's position. He was no longer there, but I had taken his place, lying on the sidewalk. Scully's head was resting on me now, listening for the heartbeat. As I was laying on this fetal position on my left side and could hear my heart beating very slowly but loudly, I could also hear my breathing slowing and realizing that I was dying. In those moments I was accepting my death and almost trying to come to terms with it. I felt no fear during these moments, but then I was taking my last breath in and the feeling of dying became overwhelmingly climatic. I realized that I didn't really want to die, and I became scared, and then my body started to get an intense buzzing, tingling feeling that felt like a wave moving from my lower back up to my head, and my body was trying to paralyze itself, if that makes any sense. In that moment of fear, I jerked myself awake. I was lying on my futon and my covers were over my face, and my body was still in the same exact fetal position I had been lying in during the dream. I was 10,000% awake, and my heart was racing, and I was breathing at a normal, quicker pace now. As I said, my covers were over my entire body, including my face and head. My room gets cold at night, which is why I fall asleep like this sometimes in the first place. Also, there was a breathing hole above my head where air was still coming through the covers, so I could breathe and was not suffocating. A few moments after awaking, I noticed that through my covers, which are lightweight and fairly see-through, the room looked bright as though it was the early morning. I reached over my head in front of me and lifted the blankets to peek out at the room to confirm that it was the morning light. When I pulled the covers down past my eyes, I saw the side profile of a whitish-bluish glowing face, with distinct features like the eye socket, mouth, nose, etc. The figure was about 12 to 24 inches away from my face, and I felt as though it was going to turn its head to look at me. It did not while I was looking at it. After maybe 2 or 3 seconds of seeing this thing, I reacted by quickly pulling the covers back over my head again in fear so that I could see it. Still, the presence of this being was overwhelmingly strong, and I felt it was tied to me in particular and focusing on me. It did not feel like something that was attached to the room, if that makes any sense. I laid under my covers, awake and scared, and eventually turned around to my right side, still hiding under the covers. My phone was on the side of the futon and under the covers with me. I fall asleep with my phone next to me, so I checked the time and it read 3:20 a.m. I was sweating and it was difficult to breathe. I didn't care how uncomfortable it was because I was too frightened to bring my face above the covers in fear of seeing this entity again. I continued to feel the entity's presence for a while, and then it gradually faded and I became brave enough to check outside of the covers. When I did, I noticed the room was almost pitch black and I could see only soft details of my desk and dresser. At this point, my eyes had adjusted to the dark. There were no logical explanations for the face and for the bright light it gave off because there are no significant sources of light in the room besides 2 or 3 small computer button lights, which were on the opposite corner of the room from where I saw the entity, and are very faint lights, smaller than a pea. Unless I had a very vivid hallucination, which never happens to me, even when I've had sleep paralysis in the past, I have no debunking explanation for what I saw and felt. Also, I will note that this was not a sleep paralysis experience. I was not paralyzed and was consciously moving my body and interacting with the object around me, and I did not fall back asleep for another hour or so. I actually ended up going to the restroom after feeling like the entity was gone, and upon returning to my room, though on edge, did not feel like it was there anymore. I told my mom of this experience, and she hypothesized that the spirit came because somehow my dream about dying, my intensity, involved state of mind about death, and somehow opened a veil of sorts to the spirit world that allowed something to come through to me, or perhaps made me vulnerable or likely to an experience with a spirit. My apologies for the length of this account. I tried to be as detailed as possible, but please feel free to comment if you need me to clarify or further explain any parts of it. Otherwise, I'm interested to know if anyone else has had a similar experience with dream death and seeing spirits, or saw the spirit in particular, or know what it was. It didn't feel necessarily evil or good, just neutral, and I felt afraid because, like most people, the supernatural does frighten me. Story number 4, The Ghost Who Came to Rehearsal, by Intuitive Starfish, date 2019-04-22. Thank you in advance for taking the time to read my story. It is my first time posting here. I've experienced many unexplainable things, but this is one that has stayed with me. In a scenic Minnesota city near where I went to college, there is a theater that is storied to be haunted by a mischievous ghost. This ghost, or the Blue Man, was known to move props, mess with curtains, and turn the stage lights on and off during performances. Stage managers would talk about things going wrong in the booth and then suddenly fixing themselves. Actors would talk about weird feelings or shadows backstage, and several people that I knew had reported to have seen a man in blue coveralls, shaggy light hair, and 70s-style glasses around the theater. The theater was attached to an old train depot, so it stands to reason that the ghost was a worker or engineer, but I do not know that to have ever been confirmed. Being an actor and paranormal believer, I love hearing stories of this supposedly haunted theater. No one ever felt threatened or that anything evil was there. If anything, stage managers and crew would be annoyed because inevitably during every production something would be amiss. I only worked there twice, both times in musicals. The first show I played a lead and would come in early, and was often the last person to be dismissed from rehearsal. I tend to be pretty sensitive to paranormal things and was aware of that feeling of being watched, or that uneasy feeling of not being alone, but not being able to place why. I was pretty consumed with rehearsals though, and didn't spend time thinking about Ghost or the Blue Man until he came to rehearsal one night. To paint a better picture of the theater itself, it's a proscenium stage, one of those big places with fly space and wing space. The stage was about 3 foot from the floor where the audience sits. The house itself has a few hundred seats, all in a slight semicircle facing the stage. The lighting booth was dead center in the back. It's important to note that there are center aisles. Audiences would enter from the lobby through double doors and then could go left or right through a swinging door that was propped open before the show and at intermission, but then closed during the performance by ushers and would have to get to their seats from either of the two aisles. This meant that if your seat was in the middle, you had quite a number of seats to walk by to get there. Each row had between 20 and 30 seats or so. The two swinging doors at the exits were very heavy and would bang loudly if you didn't catch them or close them carefully. To minimize disturbances and interruptions during rehearsals, the stage left door was always bolted shut. So basically, the only way into the theater for the audience was the door on stage right. The only door into the lighting booth was also a stage right. Alright, so one night, per the norm, I was the only actor left and was working on the stage with a director and assistant director. Everyone else had left either through the back loading dock or through the stage right door to the lobby. We had been working for a good 45 minutes and were the only 3 people left in the building. I was standing on stage toward the edge of the stage. The director and AD were on the floor in the audience in front of me, comparing notes and script that was lying on the edge of the stage. We were all leaning over it. The two of them were discussing something and suddenly got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I looked up and there he was. In the very back row, far left corner of the audience was a man with shaggy hair and 70s style glasses. It looked like he was wearing a gray button down to me, and I only saw him from mid-chest up, like he was either sitting in that corner seat or standing behind it. I did a bit of a double take because I wasn't expecting anyone else to be there and hadn't seen or heard anyone come in. I was on stage and had been performing straight out to the audience and would have seen if anyone came in. I thought, oh, it must be a janitor or the parent of one of the kids in the show, so I went back to looking at the script. The director and AD didn't seem to notice him and were still talking, so I straightened up and looked back at the guy in the back of the house. We had eye contact, and he was looking right at me. I smiled at him and did a little half wave at him. He didn't respond but kept looking at me. I looked down at the script and in a split second thought, wait, no one else is here, and immediately looked up again and he was gone. I was stunned, literally frozen, staring at where he'd been. It was only then that I remembered the description of the blue man and thought, oh my God, this must have been him. The director and AD asked me something and brought my attention back to them. I asked if everyone else had gone, and they said yes, and that we had to exit out the back because the janitor had locked everything in the front when he had left 45 minutes earlier. Neither of them saw anyone else or seemed to feel anything or to even notice that I was a bit shook up. We packed up our stuff and I watched as the AD walked to the stage left door in the audience and pulled on it. It was locked. He walked all the way across the back row of seats to the stage right door, pulled on it to make sure it was locked, and then we turned off the lights and exited through the loading dock together. When I got to my car, my heart started racing faster as I tried to reasonably explain what I had seen. It could have been a janitor. It didn't look like the janitor, but it could have been one I hadn't met yet. But if it was, I would have had to have seen him leave. I had looked away from him for no more than a second, and the man was gone. How could he have gotten out? The only door that was open during rehearsal was stage right, and I would have seen him walking across the back row just like the AD had to do to check the doors. He could not have gone into the lighting booth because that entrance was also on the right. If he had keys, he would have had to either unlock it before he left or lock it after he left, and that would have taken time, and all 3 of us would have heard the deadbolt turn. He would have had to stand and open that swinging door, which I would have seen, and if he left in a hurry, he wouldn't have had to let the door close on its own, or I wouldn't have seen it close, but there was no loud door slam. The more I thought, the more convinced I was that I had seen the blue man, my first time seeing an apparition. It was kind of a big deal, but then I started to worry. He liked to mess around with things like curtains and cables and lights in the wing space and fly space during shows, and this particular show involved actually flying with cables and harnesses. I was suddenly worried that one of his pranks could affect the rigging and someone like me or children could get hurt. The next night I got to rehearsal early. No one else was on the stage. The ghost light was still there, and I walked down stage center to where I had been standing when I saw him. I felt like someone was watching me and my chest felt tight and I was excited and nervous, and I looked out into the house, all around the stage and up in the rafters. I said something to the effect of, hello, I'm inserting name, and playing insert role. Thank you for coming to rehearsal last night. It's nice to meet you. We're all very excited for the show, but I'm really nervous about flying and all the harnesses and cables. Would you mind keeping an eye on us and keeping us safe? And then I thanked him again for coming to rehearsal and for sharing the space with us. I didn't see him again after that. I sometimes felt things backstage, but for the most part, paranormally speaking, things were quiet the rest of rehearsals. People even commented on how they hadn't seen or heard from the blue man yet. We got through all the rehearsals and all of the performances without a single problem with props or lights or sound or cables. Well, that couldn't be obviously explained by human error. At the cast party, the stage manager and I were talking, and she said it was the first show she had ever done where the Blue Man didn't do anything, and she had been doing shows there for years. When I told her about what I had experienced, she smiled and nodded her head and said, "Well, must have made a friend." I don't know if that's true, but I'm very glad to have had that interaction. I think because I said hello that first night and asked him nicely to keep us safe, that we had some kind of understanding, at least for that show. The very next musical I was also in. I didn't see him or even really feel his presence during rehearsals, but then one night during the first huge company number, the stage lights suddenly all went out. The actors and musicians kept going, and a minute or so later the lights all suddenly came back on. The show must go on, and no one missed a beat but at intermission. I found the stage manager who was in the booth controlling the lights and asked her what happened. She sort of laughed and said, "I guess he's back at it." Thank you for watching and listening to today's video and story. We know your time is valuable and really do appreciate that you spent some of it with us today. If you haven't already, then please like and subscribe, so it helps us greatly. We hope to see you again soon. Have a great day or evening. Trail Time Stories out.